Hello, everybody, and welcome to your Rouxbe live event. My name is Eric Wynkoop, and I'm the Director of Culinary Instruction here at Rouxbe, and also one of the chef instructors on our instructional team. And so you'll see me in your courses as well. Today's event specifically is my office hours event. So this is your chance to ask questions about food and cooking, and I'll do my best to respond to them. And, as we start out, I will share a couple of typical housekeeping items that'll help you in your interaction during today's event. As you look on your screen on the right-hand side upper corner, you'll see a white dialog box that says Add Question Here. If you'd like to participate, with a question or even a comment, feel free to enter that there, and it'll make its way to the queue, which you see on the right-hand side of your page. Now, as you look at the individual questions that are already populated, you'll see a heart icon in the upper right-hand corner of those individual question boxes. If you would like me to respond to that particular question sooner than later, feel free to click on that heart-shaped icon and it'll push it up in priority in the queue. All right. Now, as we start out today, what I'd like to do is respond to a regular sort of stream of questions that I get. I notice these patterns over a period of time, and the topic is one of shelf life of food in dry storage, as well as under refrigeration and in the freezer. So I'm going to talk about this first before I answer the specific questions that you see in the queue. All right. And, as I think about food storage and shelf life, what comes to mind first is the number of variables that are at play. And I want you to think about the ingredients that you buy and your particular storage conditions. All right. In other words, when each of you asks this common question, it can be difficult for me to respond, certainly with any detail, because I don't know your specific scenario. And so consequently, I want to take this opportunity to provide some overarching information, kind of a lens through which you can view your food situation and evaluate it on your own. Okay. And so the challenge is that there are many variables. And so, depending on the food that you buy from week to week, let's say, the quality can differ depending on its age at the time you buy it, depending on the variety, depending on how it was grown, how it was stored in the interim, not to mention your own storage conditions in your home. The precise temperature of your refrigerator, how frequently you might open and close the refrigerator door, thereby letting in warm air, how much direct sunlight your foods experience, and the precise temperature of that cool place where you choose to store your foods, right? Is it the basement? Is it a root cellar? Is it an air-conditioned house? Is it not an air-conditioned space? All of these things might seem cool to us, but they vary. And so they affect the shelf life of any given food, okay? Keep those things in mind, okay, as we talk about this, as we think about this. Now, in the pantry, right, in the dry storage, items that come in bags and cans and boxes, there's, certainly a very often a use by date that you can reference. That'll give you a pretty good idea of how to go about this inventory management. But always keep in mind that depending on ambient temperature and humidity and direct sunlight, those are probably the big three factors. The shelf life of that item may be shortened or it may be extended. And what we'll notice from these food items is some deterioration, usually in flavor, aroma, taste, right? That suite of characteristics that we first notice when we put an item up close to our mouth or into our mouth, right? We're taking the aroma, and then we get the experience on the palate. And so rancidity is what we often experience when fats become oxidized and they get a little bit funky. And as a general approach for me anyway, I like to think about trying to use things up in dry storage, certainly within 6 months. And sometimes, I might even aim for something like 3 months. If I think about quarters throughout the year, it's easier for me to manage those things. And in order to help facilitate that system that I have, whether it's at home or in my previous life in restaurant kitchens, I continue to date the item. I put the date of when I received the item or when I brought the item home, so that I know how long that I have had that item. Of course, I don't have control over what happened before I purchased it, but I certainly do once I get it. And so things that go into the fridge often have a date. Things that go into the refrigerator or the pantry rather, or the freezer, I'll put a date on those things in order to help monitor the process here. So I encourage all of you to do that. Have a Sharpie at your disposal and use it liberally. Okay. Taste things. Okay. So if you see a use by date on the container, it's a guideline, and it's one that is put on by the manufacturer. Very often, as I've mentioned, foods will be good beyond the use by date, and there's nothing wrong with using foods if they're still in good condition when you're beyond the use by date. Now, conversely, right, we should taste things before we just dump food into the pot for cooking, because it may have gone bad, so to speak, in terms of developing rancidity or some other off quality that would detract from the finished product that you're putting your heart and soul into producing. Okay. Now, with respect to the refrigerator, things can vary quite a bit here. My general rule of thumb is to think of shelf life in one, as a 1 week unit. And when things start to approach about a week, and maybe it's 5 or 6 or 7 days, then I'm really looking at it and paying attention to the visual quality, the aroma. I'll touch the food. Very often when foods start to spoil, they become sticky on the surface. So these are all telltale signs of the decline of food. Keep in mind that when we receive fresh food, it's of course best to use it immediately, certainly just as quickly as you can. And what a refrigerator helps you do is maintain the freshness of old food. And that's the way I think about it. And so the goal is to also purchase food in small enough units that you can consume it in a reasonable amount of time before you need to really think about spoilage. Okay. And so when we think about things in the refrigerator, they all have a different ideal life, based upon, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, the individual item and how it's been handled before it came to your refrigerator, as well as the specifics of your own setting. So please have patience with this process as you get to know how things act and react in your environment, and know that it can be different each time you go shopping, right? Because of those variables. All right, but we're talking about several days, and if things exceed a week, try to use them up because they're only getting older as they sit around. All right, and then we come to the freezer. The freezer is a very convenient appliance, and it's certainly one that I use. However, I've noted that both in professional settings as well as in domestic settings, the freezer can become a catch-all and an aging box, so to speak, as we forget about things. Or if they're not labeled, sometimes we don't recognize things, so we just leave them be. So you get in the habit of managing your freezer and dating items so you can rotate those items out in a timely manner. All the while, whether it's in dry storage, the refrigerator, or in the freezer, we use the FIFO, F-I-F-O system, or the first in, first out system of inventory management, which means we're using the oldest stuff first, okay? And that's going to help you maintain the best overall quality, okay? Again, and I'll repeat myself, keeping in mind that you need to manage your purchasing quantities and frequency to match your consumption rate, okay, of those food items. All right. Now, in terms of the freezer, I certainly like to cycle things out of the freezer, within a maximum window of about 6 months. And, very often it's going to be less than that. If I'm working on the quarter system again, I might be thinking about 3 months intervals as really being more ideal in terms of maintaining quality, because things in the freezer slowly decline. They dry out. They experience freezer burn, as we call it, and that's going to affect the texture as well as the flavor and aroma. And very often that's an irreversible process. And so we're talking about the loss of food at that point. Okay. And so with practice, based upon the specific foods that you routinely purchase, you'll get a better idea of how these things act and react in your specific environment. Okay. And then, of course, you got to stay engaged with it every day or two or three, and be diligent about using things according to the FIFO methodology. Okay, I hope this is helpful in setting the tone for shelf life of products and what our individual responsibilities are in terms of acquiring knowledge and confidence through practice, and then with our daily engagement. All right, let's move on to the questions of the day and see what all of you are thinking. All right, here we go. This first one is from Hannah. What is a good size cutting board to own and start with? Should it be glass, bamboo, or wood? Okay, so, at home here, I'm typically cooking for 3. And the cutting board that I usually reach for is approximately, I'm going to say 13 inches by 18 inches. And we've got a bigger one that's twice that big, and we've got a couple of them that are about half that size. And I'll bring those out for, for other things as needed. But I think the main one we use is approximately 13 by 18. And that also equates to approximately the size of a half sheet pan, which fits into most ovens for oven work. But that's just a side point, but just as a reference. Okay, that's going to be a common size. Thank you. And then the second part of your question is the material. Generally speaking, I like to avoid particularly hard surfaces, namely glass and stainless steel. And I'm still surprised when I see cutting boards made of these materials, because they are very hard and will wear down the cutting edge of your blade pretty quickly. comparatively speaking. Plastic is fine, in my opinion, as well as natural fibers. Natural fibers meaning the various woods that are out there. Bamboo, in my opinion, is basically fine. If you read commentary on the internet, you'll see folks that split hairs over the silica content of bamboo and how it wears down your knife faster than acacia wood and this and that. That's all fine and dandy. I've got bamboo, I've got wood, I've got plastic, and it all, I think, works quite fine. Knives still need to be maintained periodically, but fundamentally avoid the very, very hard surfaces. Thank you, Hannah. All right, next up from Rosalind. My husband has celiac disease. I was wondering what flour you would recommend instead of spelt and sorghum, which I see used in some of the baked goods. Thank you. I've experimented with green banana, cassava, almond, coconut, and Bob's Red Mill gluten-free. Okay, well, in terms of gluten-free flours, there are, many others, and I'll mention just a few, and then I encourage you to follow up with an internet search, and you can kind of play around with these things. But there's certainly various rice flours available, and any grain or even a legume, right, can be turned into a flour. So there's garbanzo bean flour and quinoa flour. You mentioned almond flour. You can certainly use other nuts and turn those into flours as well. Keeping in mind that all of these different flours, whether they're nut-based, legume-based, or grain-based, will have a particular fat content as well as a flavor profile and a color, right? A look to it. And so think about those things based upon what it is that you're making and the desired end result. Now, as you're sort of experimenting and playing around, as I like to say, with these ingredients, take notes and approach this with an open mind of curiosity. And also note that depending on what you're doing, it's often beneficial to blend these gluten-free flours in order to achieve certain balances, whether it's a balance in texture, right, or flavor or aroma that will suit your particular palate and those that you're feeding at home. Okay, thank you. Oh, look at this. Hannah has a follow-up question. Also, will knives tend to dull on the type of cutting board material one uses? Yes, so this is what I alluded to earlier. And now, again, having said that, knives will become dull just from cutting food, even if you weren't using a cutting board. So while we try to maximize the cutting edge by avoiding, as I said, these particularly hard materials, it's still necessary to maintain a knife, ideally daily on the steel, which very simply, with use, the cutting edge, if we're looking at that knife, will start to roll over, and the steel will straighten that up again and introduce sharpness to that blade. Now, over time, things just sort of wear down, and that's the dulling effect of prolonged use. And at that point, you need to put it on a stone or some other sharpening tool to grind a fresh cutting edge on the blade. Okay, and that can be done depending on the volume of cutting, the frequency, and the things that you cut. You might sharpen your knife once a year. It could be more or less than that. All right, hope that's helpful. Thank you. All right, next question from Ron. When I look at vegan recipes, there is often the use of vegetable oils. What can I use as a substitute to stay in line with FOK guidelines? So if you are thinking of the no oil approach to food preparation, then simply omit the oil. And there's not going to be a substitute in most cases, I would say. Okay. If it's going to be for routine cooking, then certainly we would omit the additional fat. If the fat happens to have a different function in the recipe, there might be a consideration for a substitute. And I'd have to think about that on a case-by-case basis. The way that we think about substitutions is to look at the original ingredient and to think about its various functions in that recipe. Okay, an ingredient may serve as a point of color and visual interest, for example. It may provide flavor. It may provide texture. It might provide a binding effect or something else. And so we want to think about substitutions that will mimic those characteristics that would be removed once we take out that original ingredient. Okay, but back to the fat question. Generally speaking, there's not going to be a substitution for fat or for vegetable oil. We're simply going to move forward, without it. But again, it depends on what it is. Okay, and I guess one example comes to mind here. If we're making, let's say, pancakes or a quick bread, it's possible to use applesauce as a substitution, where the oil is very often added simply as a moisturizing ingredient. Okay, so something to think about. All right, thank you. All right, hello, Marina. Let's see, I'm looking to buy a torch for my kitchen. Is it better to get a culinary torch, or will a DIY model work? Do you recommend any particular type or model? Well, now, I happen to have at my side here a torch that I just recently bought, and I haven't used it yet, so it's still in the package here. I got this off of Amazon. This particular brand, the name is spelled IEIK. I can't vouch for it yet because I haven't used it, but the consumer ratings were very high. Note that there are other branded items that are identical to this thing. And this was probably 16 or 17 US dollars. And by the description, it does everything that I want it to do. It fits on one of these butane canisters, handy for, well, let's see, just generally, I'm looking at the back here, gratining, savory dishes, finishing creme brulee, all these things that I also enjoy doing when I'm camping. And that was one motivation for buying this. But anyway, give that a try. I think this sort of a model you do find used in restaurants. I've certainly used these large butane tanks, not giant, but handheld with a nozzle if you're doing higher volume production in a restaurant. But something like this, I think, is going to be quite fine for the smaller scale cookery that I tend to focus on these days. All right, hope that's helpful for you. Thank you. All right, next up, greetings. Hello, Vivian. I would like to know how this course will help with cooking for the heart and staying away from the bad oils, seasonings, breads, etc. I am focused on reversing heart disease while continuing to develop a healthy routine. Well, just offhand, I don't know exactly which course you're enrolled in, but by the sounds of it, I'm guessing it's one of the plant-based courses. And, having that foundation, okay, or that this scenario as well, know that what you put into your food is going to be within your control. Okay, and our courses at Rouxbe really focus on developing cooking skills and the ancillary techniques that support cooking in the kitchen. Okay. Now, the ingredients that you choose are ultimately up to you. We provide recipes for practice, as we say, but you are welcome to make substitutions. You can, in looking at your list here of criteria, in terms of bad oils, some people would argue that added oils generally are not so good for you, but certainly I'll let you pick and choose what oils you prefer to use. And then also reducing the quantity of especially added oils becomes desirable. Seasonings that could be avoided, probably salt, right, is probably the main item that comes to mind. That should be controlled or in some cases omitted. And otherwise, other flavorings are probably a good thing when it comes to, say, spices. Breads, totally up to you, okay, on how you might want to handle that. If you want to eat bread from time to time, perhaps you choose a whole grain bread, which has a higher fiber content. And therefore is usually preferable. Certainly probably is for most everybody most of the time. But yeah, otherwise, your second part of your message here, you're focused on reversing heart disease. And certainly there's a lot of evidence out there that suggests that a plant-based diet that is performed in a certain way can be effective to that end. But I would also mention that you might consider working under the direction of a physician, especially a plant-based physician, that can give you specific guidance to help you achieve your goals. All right, thank you. All right, next up, let's see. Daniel is in the FOK Ultimate course. I'm having issues getting a consistent cut size. It's close, but not to where I want to be. Can you give me some additional hints for the problem for this problem in particular? I'm quite comfortable with my 8-inch chef's knife, if that helps. Aha. Well, now, so let me start by saying that knife skill development, once you start to get to a more precise level of performance, is really difficult. Okay. I'm not going to be discouraging, but I will be realistic. Okay. And I want you to think about, first of all, doing your best, right? And, I always encourage my students to aim very, very high. Okay. As you start with knife skills, as you work slowly and methodically to train your eye to understand what a 1/4 inch is versus 3/4 inch, and how to line up your knife parallel to the previous cut, so you can get pieces that aren't tapered but rather square at the ends, and so on and so forth. Because as we add speed to the knife work, accuracy drops. That's just the way it goes. And so we try to aim high in the beginning, understanding that when we get into that routine of cooking, that we're going to stay close, to the brunoise or the medium dice, whatever the target might be. But that accuracy will drop. Okay. And so you get to choose when it's important to have really sharp knife cuts versus a little bit of irregularity. All right. So for me, a daily basis, there's going to be some irregularity because I'm banging out dinner in 35 minutes, sort of a thing. But if there's a special meal and I want the end product to look a little sharper than usual, then I'm going to spend more time on knife cuts. Okay. Now, having said that, the basic sort of pointers that that come to mind for me are, take the time to ensure that your knife relative to the cutting board is perpendicular, right? That's going to give you your best opportunity at nice square edges. And then take the time on your subsequent cut to make sure that your knife is parallel or perpendicular to the cutting board and parallel to your previous cut. And so we've got these three dimensions that we get to consider. And then think about your body positioning from head to toe. Very often we rotate the body, maybe 30 degrees or 45 degrees to the counter and to the cutting board in order to get into a comfortable position so that our body parts don't become sore. And also in a position that will help facilitate the natural movement of the shoulder, the arms, the wrist, as we push that cutting tool back and forth. Okay. And it's practice. It's a lot of practice. I would suggest that you run down to the restaurant supply store and buy a couple of 50-pound cases of potatoes and a 20-pound bag of carrots, and just start moving through this product. And you do that till you develop a callus on your index finger, which rests on the spine of the knife, and it's going to hurt. And you just push through the hurt until that callus develops, and then focus, and you're going to get that muscle memory from head to toe, and it's going to get better, okay, by doing so. Keep in mind that your own eyesight has a role in all of this. My eyesight's not as good as it was 25 years ago, and my knife cuts today aren't as easily accomplished as they were 25 years ago. I noticed that change. And so keep these things in mind, but all the while, again, find that reasonable place to be, okay, and do your best, okay? So I hope that these practical tips, as well as some of the encouragement, as well as some of the reality talk, right, is helpful for you to find that approach and that place that you want to be in as you work on your knife skill development. All right, thank you. All right, next up is Deborah. Hello. I have two questions. One, on the exam, I missed the question about when to add garlic when sweating. I would like clarification on that. I thought it would be at the end of sweating so as not to burn it. Let's see. I think I need to see the specific the question here to respond to this most accurately, but let me try to glean some information here. So when to add garlic when sweating. So it sounds like we're sweating some other things, okay, perhaps onions or shallots or something else. And when to add garlic. Well, it can vary, right? We often will add garlic at some point, after these other more robust items and less delicate items have kind of begun their sweating process, because garlic often will catch up, so to speak, to those other items very quickly because it's fairly delicate. Okay. I hope that's helpful, that context. That's, I think, is specific as I can get right now, okay, without seeing the content in the course relative to the specific question wording, okay. And then, second question is about vegan cheese. I've been fermenting quinoa to make Rouxbe, but read that both miso and lemon juice can be used instead. Does that vary depending on the type of vegan cheese and what ratios? My quick answer is, each cheese has its own sort of flavor target, right, that we're after, texture target and flavor and aroma. So the type of ingredient to spur fermentation, right, will result in some slightly different results. And depending on what kind of end profile you desire, you might take a look at some guidance online, for example, to help you align fermentation starting points to get you to that desired end point. Okay. On the other hand, if you just want to make cheese more generally and you're not concerned so much about what it might mimic, right, in the dairy world, then try these other things, right? I mean, miso is a fermented product. If you get it in good condition, it should still be alive. And see how you like the results. Okay, that's the fun thing with experimentation and substitutions, is that you might be blazing a trail that is going to be all yours. And so you get to understand that experience also in your own setting, right, where yeasts and bacteria in your environment may be a little bit different than somebody else's kitchen. And so your process and your end result may be unique. But give that a try, with an open mind. Now, ratios, I don't know offhand. I'd have to look those up, and I would encourage you to look online for some guidance. Or again, start with a base recipe and just make a one-to-one substitution, see how you like the results, take notes along the way, and then continue to fine-tune the process for your own palate and for your own desired application of that cheese. All right, thank you. All right, so Deborah's following up and says onions first. Yeah, so regarding garlic, I would get the onions in the pan first, and then garlic is added along the way. If the idea is to sweat the garlic, then the garlic needs to be in the pan for a little while to allow it to sweat as well. Okay, but if you wanted a more robust or raw state of garlic, then you might add it right at the very end and then move on to whatever comes after that. So it depends on what it is that you're producing. All right. The beauty of cooking, so many variables. Thank you. All right. Next up from Brandon. Is there a better document that lists out time and temperatures for roasting various vegetables, or perhaps a document that lists out vegetables with recommended times and temperatures for various processing techniques? Is there a better document? So I think you're probably referring to what's already available in the course. No, that would be my quick answer. What we have in the course is going to reflect the reference that we have, and Patrick has listed here the PDF for roasting times for vegetables. Let me add to this particular question. This goes along with the theme of variables that is the topic, the common thread today. When we put together a PDF of roasting times, for example, or when you see a recipe to make something, whether it's on Rouxbe or anywhere else in the world, it's really a suggestion. Okay, it's going to be based upon our test kitchen and our experience, based upon the particular skill level that we have and the ingredients that we choose and the equipment that we have at our disposal. Your situation will certainly vary to some extent or another, not to mention your palate preference could vary from ours. And so this is where you need to be, you start out with these guidelines, right? And then, be willing to make adjustments depending on what it is. And when we change the size of a knife cut, when we change the variety of an item, and so on and so forth, then this whole process changes to some extent or another. Okay. And that's the reality of cooking. And I would go so far as to say that if anybody tells you that they've got a solid recipe that will work for anybody in any situation, they're trying to sell you something else. All right, because it simply doesn't work that way. The joy of cooking, in my opinion, is that it's based upon an accumulation of experience and getting to know how, again, items act and react throughout the year, throughout the different seasons, in your setting. Okay, so please be open to the experimentation that is part and parcel of the cooking process. Okay, yeah, so Brandon's follow-up here is that my question previously about the roasting times comes from the FOK course, okay, which references the PDF that Patrick posted. I don't use oil, okay. Yes, so, start with these guidelines and then fine-tune it. And, you will end up having your own list as you make adjustments to the cooking time. And you might even adjust the temperature to see how you like things done at a lower temperature, longer cooking time, for example. Okay, so give that a try. Thank you. All right, Barbara's asking, can you recommend a good set of knives? As you know, there are many brands on the market, and there are many good knife sets or companies, manufacturers. In terms of a value, a brand that always comes to mind is Victorinox, and that's the Swiss Army knife people. They have a line of knives that are inexpensive and comparatively lower quality in terms of having a stamped steel blade and a molded rubber handle. But the quality of the steel is such that they're pretty easy to maintain. They're hard enough that they'll hold a cutting edge for a reasonably long time. They're soft enough that they're pretty easy to sharpen when that time comes. And they, they're not expensive. I think you buy a chef's knife for $50 or $60 or so, depending on the size. And several years ago, Consumer Reports magazine rated the Victorinox chef's knife their top choice. And I thought that was pretty cool as well. So consider that particular brand to start with. Thank you. And Ellen is asking, can a whole food plant-based diet ease or cure psoriasis? Offhand, I don't know, but you might take a look at some of the plant-based doctors online that have websites and some commentary, on specific diseases. That might help you out. And you can, certainly reach out to some of these folks as well, via their chat platform for some specific feedback. All right, thank you. Okay, so next up from Danica. Hello. I'm looking for a pot or pan set under $100 total. Do you have any brand recommendations? Also, what are the pros and cons of stainless steel cookware? Okay, so this is the challenge of the day. A pot or pan set for under $100. Wow, those are probably few and far between in terms of ones that I would have confidence in. If you're willing to sweeten the pot by another $50 or so, then I think we've got some options. What comes to mind for me is at Costco, there is a Kirkland brand stainless steel cookware set, which in my opinion is a good value. And that's probably in the neighborhood of 150, maybe $160, something like that. There's also a Hinkle brand stainless steel cookware set, which also, in my opinion, is a good value. And that one is probably in the similar price neighborhood, $120 to $160 or so. Those come to mind, sort of at the lower price range end. Okay, you might also look at IKEA. IKEA has at least a couple of different lines of stainless steel cookware, and the price points at IKEA are very attractive as well. Okay. And then the second part of your question, what are the pros and cons of stainless steel cookware? Pros are that they're easy to maintain. They clean up pretty easily. Certainly some elbow grease may be required depending on what sort of persnickety stains remain. But overall, pretty low maintenance. Okay. Cons, I don't associate in particular cons really with stainless steel. If you want to talk about other cookware materials, some of them heat up faster, some of them hold heat more evenly and longer because they're of a heavier construction. But if we look at stainless steel, I don't have any issues or cons that I would associate with stainless steel. Okay, thank you. And let's see. Another question from Brandon. I tried to tune my oven after buying an oven thermometer. What I found is that when I tried to adjust the offset, it was all over the map. The oven thermometer appeared to stick to the target temperature, and I think that also made it hard. So what gives? Wow, this is getting into some oven maintenance here, and I'm not up to speed on the oven adjustment and maintenance. I think if you might consider reaching out to either an appliance repair person or even the manufacturer of your oven to get some guidance specifically to this question. Okay, I appreciate you reaching out though, Brandon. All right, thank you. And this brings us to the conclusion of today's list of questions. I want to thank each one of you for attending today's event. And, we'll meet again in a couple of weeks. And in the meantime, keep on cooking. Cook with an open mind, right, toward substitutions, the changes that come about that are, unique to your particular setting. Right, as you develop more experience and sort of muscle memory, right, through the experience of cooking. All right, all the best to you. Thank you.